Hello, everybody. This is Gynarchic Awakening. I actually wasn't expecting to do another video, but I have a couple of problems. First, I'm waiting for a game of mine to have certain features again. It's one I use to make money. So there's that. There's also the fact that I don't know what it is. Like, I don't even know how it happens. I guess everybody's process is different. Mine is like I get an idea or a thought in my head and I can't let it go. So I ended up like fleshing it out a little bit, writing it out. It took me about 3 pages. Uh, the I'm not really sure how to handle the title. I'm not really sure what to title it. So, but because this is a Gynarchy YouTube channel, I thought maybe having some kind of G word in it that concerns us would probably be the best way to think about it. So this is actually going to be broken up into parts because this is complicated, and I don't think that I think I would be doing a disservice to my community as well as to the kind of work I can do if I don't go into the full detail that I can about this. So the title for the time being is Should Gynarchists Concern Themselves with How Violence is Presented and Processed in Academic Environments? Um, this is going to be, in my view, a controversial video because it's going to seem counterintuitive. And I don't have a particular structure for it because this is supposed to be a rest day for me. I'm not supposed to be doing physical labor or activity on the weekends. I'm supposed to be not doing that. So I want to start off this discussion. I want to start off this question with an experience that I had in high school and I had in the other schools. The way that violence was presented and how I processed it was usually there were two types of violence that I was exposed to in the academic world. There was historical violence, in other words, violence that took place between historical figures, and then there was social violence, either violence I experienced with other male students or other students. I can't remember a time I ever got into physical education with a woman, or girl. I don't think I ever did. My memory is not the best, but that didn't happen in the school environment. I I know that for sure. Um, then there is the fact that if it's not social context, like if there's not some kind of situation where you're being bullied or you're punching another guy or he's punching you or it's escalating into a physical confrontation that's more deadly in nature. If it isn't one of those things, then when we look at the rest of the academic world, we actually see how there's a lack of violent material being presented. Also, I've been meaning to ask this question ever since I was brainstorming the topic, ever since it entered into my mind, which is it necessarily a good thing to introduce the language of violence if we're only going to explore one particular type? Is that good for students to only explore this type or to explore it in a very narrow-minded way or a very I want to say, I mean, it's like very watered down, right? Like, for example, when you are studying American history or you're studying the history of the world, when they talk about World War II, they'll just say stuff like, oh, well, there was this rape in Beijing thing. It's like a paragraph or two. It's like, really, you want to talk about sexual violence and you want to water it down to like 2 paragraphs and expect students to go look up this stuff on their own. And then when it comes to historical violence, it's usually just these are the cities that were bombed, these are the battles that took place. The the problem though is that language that violence is a very complex language that human beings have expressed for thousands of years. It is as complex, if not arguably more complex, than the language of mathematics, than the language of any other kind of thing like science terms. Uh, and when you look at all of the other classes, you don't see or read stuff like, like if a man shoots three men in a straight line. This is something that unfortunately happened during the Holocaust. It was a tragedy. People would be experimenting, seeing how many people a bullet could go through. They were just sick and twisted. But you don't see that in a math class or a physics class. They don't cover those subjects. They have a tendency to keep the violence in it almost non-existent or toned down. Now there is the occasional boxing example in physics, but it's usually related to how you are receiving force or reducing the force of impact to your face or body. So if we look at all of them, chemistry, what is it? Chemistry, physics, mathematics, pretty much almost every single one of these subjects. Wood shop. I had wood shop in high school. Almost none of them can ever really explore it. And I wanted to suggest the proposition that maybe actually that's not a good thing. That maybe it's not a good thing to leave a language like this largely unexplored in an academic environment. It seems counterintuitive, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. You're not actually saying we should talk about violence in an academic way or an intellectual way or philosophical way, right? And I'm here to suggest the controversial opinion that actually it should not only be talked about, uh, the language of violence should be an academic subject, treated with the same level of seriousness as we would any other one like math or science. And it's because we are because when you don't do that, who are people turning to, especially young men? Who are young men turning to in order to process their violent thoughts and behaviors or the other things that they're going through? Who takes up the responsibility of helping them to navigate and explore the language of violence? Who is doing that? Who is teaching them the right ways to channel aggression or the wrong ways, or who is leading them down the wrong road? And is this something that we should be concerned about? And I thought that since the academic world is going to be undergoing great changes soon, maybe this is the time for us to consider our own changes. Right? Not all change has to be bad. Yes, there's going to be. I think they're going to break up the Department of Education, the next administration, but isn't the impetus on us to consider the flaws, and like shouldn't we take this as an opportunity to not just focus on the fact that it's happening, but to reflect on what is wrong with the current system and what can we do about it as individuals? Like, can we change everything? Now, why do I feel like it should be taught in an academic, philosophical way? And why would I believe that it would actually be good and not bad? Because it's not just how you teach it, it's what you're teaching them about it. It's helping them to understand this stuff. So that, because when I was very young, I was in an abusive household where people were regularly screaming at each other. There were fist fights breaking out. This was just normal for the home I came out of. I didn't realize this stuff was violent. This was some of the more deadly violence, more abusive stuff. I could recognize violence, but I didn't fully comprehend it. And I didn't always know that there were certain things going on that were going to manifest into the violent outbursts that I happened to be a witness to. And I think there are obviously challenges. There's people who are worried that if students really knew everything that they maybe the parents don't want them to know or their guardians don't want them to know about the adult world and how adults behave, that would alter behaviors. Some of them might leave home, some of them might stop taking them seriously, might question their ideologies, their politics. And so this is a touchy subject, and it has to be treated with the seriousness that it deserves. But I would like to draw a comparison to show how, like, there was a time when stuff like Mortal Kombat and these other bloody games came out, people were concerned about a rise in violence. And actually, the opposite is now being proposed. There's people who have been coming out arguing that actually violence in video games reduces violence in real life. And not only does it reduce it, it actually drops the crime rates. So, and of course, I'm not saying video games are perfect. I'm not saying they don't have problems. They definitely do. I suffered from video game addiction. It fucked my life up. So I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just simply saying that the presence of violence as a discussion topic or as a topic in a classroom setting doesn't necessarily have to inspire violence itself. I think it depends on how you go about the topic, because I believe that video games is just one medium that men are turning to in order to express violent behaviors, but also to process them, to understand them. And they're not the only ones doing it. So, and I kind of wrote this down because I wanted to talk about it. Like, who are young men turning to in order to understand violence? Who is engaging with this in a way that they can understand, that they can research, that they can think about without actually having to engage in it themselves? Who are the ones that the men are turning to? There are mangaka. Mangaka is a term for a person who writes a manga. So, for example, we have several. We have Masashi Kishimoto. We have the creator of Bleach. We have Tite Kubo. We have Oda Eiichiro. These are three of the people who regularly incorporate violence and violent actions that characters take in their stories. And the violence always seems to have a different source. For example, in the world of Naruto, violence is considered cyclical. It's considered something that keeps going like this. It starts with this, it goes back to this person, and then it just never ends. You know, there's a famous speech from the show called The Cycle of Hate, and they're not the only ones who did that. There have been other there have been other writers for TV shows that have gone into and touched on that subject of cyclical violence and hatred. But when you look at Bleach, it's more like the violence is a result of somebody having their agency taken away. In other words, somebody facing unfair treatment that doesn't take into account their unique circumstances and what they were doing, and whether or not that was justified. So the violence that comes about in Bleach is a result of somebody rejecting the idea that we shouldn't consider things on a case-to-case basis and that everything in the law should just be black and white. That's dangerous. And so the violence in that, especially in the first arc when he goes to rescue Rukia, that violence comes about as a result of the unfair treatment of Rukia Kuchiki, who committed an illegal action but did so in order to save the life of a young man and his family. If she didn't do that, they would have been dead. So she took an action that was morally complex, that may have had negative consequences, and yet she wanted those people to stay alive. She didn't want them to be killed by a monster. So there's that, and then we have in like just an example in One Piece, we have a case where there are these individuals called celestial dragons who practice slavery, who enslave people, and you have a world government that supports and endorses slavery, along with other horrifying practices, which, if you've been reading the latest chapters of the manga, also happen to include mass murder. So one of the characters who does not like the way that a slaver is treating people who are slaves is to beat the shit out of them. So this is what happens when you have somebody who believes in absolute freedom coming into contact with somebody who thinks that only some people should be free. And the violence came about as a result of an institution, which the institution of slavery. This is what inspired the violence. The fact that these people in the show that he was defending and fighting on behalf of were not free to make their own choices, or felt that they had to restrain the way they talked, the way they felt, in order to please the slave masters. And so these are some of the ways in which violence came about between pirates and slave owners. Like in this particular story, it was one thing that One Piece does is it's like the normal association you have with piracy being automatically a bad thing and, governments being the good thing is kind of thrown out the window. In this case, it's the people in charge of the institution, it's the world government that is presented as evil or having very morally questionable values or doing extremely morally questionable things, or just straight up abusing their authority and power, versus a guy who, while he is absolutely free, he only ever seems to fight against tyrants and abusers. I'm going to take this to part two.